Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McClain starts now.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. It is so good to be on with you. Praise be to God. We have a lot to get to today. While Cardinal Tagley is singing terrible Beatles tunes, the cardinals are gathering at the Vatican. They're preparing not only for His Holiness Pope Francis's funeral, God rest his soul, but also to elect the next pope. All that while First Things calls Pope Francis a trad icon. So we have a lot to cover today. We're going to be doing this with Mike McCormick back on the team. He wrote the book An Insurmountable Evil. You might remember he was the White House stenographer under Obama and the first Trump admin. And Pope Francis visited the White House during those days. So we're going to ask him about his memory of that and his reflection. Also on the team today is Dr. Anthony Stine from returntotradition.org. We'll talk about the First Things article, Pope Francis trad icon. Seems rather kind of crazy to me. But nonetheless, I think it's also important to understand what is the average Vatican employee feeling right about now. All of this while the faithful continue to say their goodbyes to Pope Francis as he lies in state at St. Peter's Basilica. He will be buried tomorrow. And by the way, I will be on Newsmax in the morning twice, I think, in the 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. Eastern time zone to give some commentary on Newsmax. So I'll be posting that to the Telegram group when I know the times for sure. But we have a lot to get to today. Let's continue to pray for the repose of Pope Francis, asking Our Lady to intercede for him and for the cardinals who are going to elect the next pope. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand sinful and sorrowful, O Mother of the Word incarnate. Despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And now your saint of the day.
Saint Mark, pray for us. Mark was born a Jew of the priestly tribe of Levi and Aaron, according to St. Bede the Venerable. He may have also been known as John or John Mark, and some theorize that Mark was the young man who fled naked from the garden when our Lord was arrested. Mark was a close disciple of St. Peter and served as the first pope's interpreter. He composed his gospel at the request of the Roman faithful, under the direct aid, influence, and approval of his master Peter. Mark went on to become the founding bishop of the city of Alexandria, and thus the father of the church in Africa. In the year of our Lord 68, he was apprehended by angry pagans in Alexandria. They dragged him through the streets for an entire day, tearing his body nearly to pieces, before throwing him into prison, where he was consoled by heavenly visions. Mark was dragged through the streets again the next day, until he finally expired. His relics now rest under the high altar in the great St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. Mark's symbol as an evangelist is the lion, often a winged lion. His feast is now closely associated with the greater litanies and rogation procession that were assigned to this date even before St. Mark's feast was fixed to it. When his feast falls within the Easter octave, like this year, St. Mark's feast is usually transferred to the next week. For more about this day and others in the Church's calendar, visit thestationofthecross.com/saints-and-seasons. St. Mark, pray for us.
And now your headline news. Just the news reports Donald Trump tells Vladimir Putin to stop. President Donald Trump yesterday called on Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop airstrikes on Ukraine following an overnight attack on the country's capital city of Kiev that reportedly killed at least 8 people. The strike comes hours after Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected a peace deal that reportedly included him accepting Russia's occupation of Crimea as a condition, which resulted in Trump using social media to criticize Zelensky and J.D. Vance to warn them by saying the U.S. will walk away if they don't reach an agreement. Breitbart reports judge bars Trump from denying federal funds to sanctuary cities. A federal judge in California yesterday barred the Trump admin from denying or conditioning the use of federal funds to sanctuary jurisdictions. U.S. Judge William Orrick said a preliminary injunction was appropriate because the executive orders were unconstitutional, just as they were back in 2017 when President Donald Trump announced a similar order. Orrick issued the injunction sought by San Francisco and more than a dozen other municipalities that sued a pair of executive orders that Republican president issued targeting local municipalities that limit cooperation with federal immigration efforts. And Epoch Times reports $1 billion school choice bill heads to Texas governor's desk. The Texas Senate on April the 24th voted along party lines to accept House Amendment Senate Bill number 2. Once enacted, the bill will launch a statewide education savings account program that will begin next year. The initiative will allocate $1 billion in public funds over 2 years to help eligible families cover a wide range of education-related expenses, including tuition at a non-public school, tutoring, special education services, transportation, and extracurricular activities. The program will provide approximately $10,000 per year for students attending private school, up to $30,000 a year with students with disabilities, and only $2,000 a year for homeschoolers. Always at the bottom of the barrel, aren't we? And those are your headline news. The gospel today comes to us from John chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. After this, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself after this manner. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas, who was called Didymus, and Nathanael, who was of Cana of Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter saith to them, I go a-fishing. And they say to him, We also come with thee. And they went forth and entered into the ship, and that night they caught nothing. But when the morning was come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus therefore said to them, Children, have you any meat? And they answered him, No. And he saith to them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and you shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. That disciples, therefore, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, It is the Lord. And Simon Peter, when he heard it was the Lord, girt his coat about him, for he was naked, and cast himself into the sea. But the other disciples came in the ship, for they were not far from land, but it was about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fishes. As soon as they came to land, they saw hot coals lying, and a fish laid thereon, and bread. Jesus saith to them, Bring hither of the fishes which you have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of great fishes, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not broken. Jesus saith to them, Come and dine. And none of them who were at meat durst ask him, Who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord. And Jesus cometh and taketh bread and giveth them, and fish in like manner. This is now the 3rd time that Jesus was manifested to his disciples after he was risen from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord. Laus tibi Christi. The great commentator Cornelius a Lapide would say, from this it appears that Peter and the other apostles had gone from Judea into Galilee as Christ had bidden them. For this appearance of Christ took place in Galilee, when he, being about to go into heaven, in order that he might provide for the government of the faithful, appointed Peter to be the head of the church and his vicar upon earth. This is why St. John subjoins these things and so concludes his gospel. We've seen this scene before. Peter's bark. Peter set out into the deep. Peter, cast your net over the right side. Peter jumps into the water. Peter leads the way. This is all about Peter. This is confirming him, the guy who Christ gave the keys to, and upon this rock he shall build his church. St. Gregory the Great says, an employment which was without sin before their conversion was blameless after their conversion. Therefore Peter returned to his fishing, but Matthew did not return to his receipt of the custom. Mystically speaking, Theophilus says, by night, that is, before the presence of Christ the Son, the prophets caught nothing, because although they attempted to correct but a single nation, it was continually falling into idolatry. Mystically, St. Augustine says, the broiled fish is Christ in his passion. He is the bread which came down from heaven. With him the church is incorporated for the attainment of everlasting bliss, according as it is said, bring of the fish which ye have taken, that all we who have this hope, through the sevenfold number of disciples, by which the whole company of the faithful is figured, might know that we have a share in so great a sacrament, and are partakers of the same blessedness. Those fish represent the whole world, the community of nations at the time. And it was Peter who goes and manhandles that net all the way to shore. We should not leave the bark of Peter for Judas. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Did you know you can help evangelize simply by using your cell phone? The Station of the Cross is partnering with iCatholic Mobile, America's only Catholic mobile phone company. When you join iCatholic Mobile, a portion of every dollar will support our programming. Plus, you'll enjoy great service with iCatholic Unlimited 5G data, text, and talk. With iCatholic Mobile, you can stay connected with family and friends while also spreading the truth of Jesus Christ with clarity and charity. Join today at iCatholicMobile.com.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. And I just want to say thank you to our sponsor, iCatholicMobile.com. They are on the team. I'm so grateful to them. Praise be to God, because support for our program comes to us in part by our friends at iCatholicMobile.com, a Catholic mobile phone company for individuals, families, and they support priests for free. It's an amazing thing. Religious sisters for free. It's an amazing thing. You can find more information about them at iCatholicMobile.com. My family is on the team, and I think you should find out more information. Go to iCatholicMobile.com for those details. I saw this morning Dr. Anthony Stine is coming up at 30 past the hour, and he covered this story on his feed this morning. Pope Francis trad icon over at firstthings.com. This is good stuff right here. This is so good stuff. Earlier this week, I was on Newsmax and right alongside of Rick Santorum, who I met once, by the way. He's as tall as Goliath is. I mean, the guy is massive. And he once ran for president of the United States. So it was an interesting segment to be along next to him. But there is a certain group of Catholics who fall into this first things kind of category. I would say Rick would fairly fall into that category. These are people who play it fairly safe. They have conservative values for sure, but at the same time, they don't rock the boat all that much, which is why this article is pretty interesting. We're going to be talking to Dr. Anthony Stine at 30 past and getting his take and much, much more. So stick around for that and share us with a friend. But let me read this to you because I found it incredible. It says this: the early years of Pope Francis's reign coincided with an HBO show about a young chain-smoking pontiff who takes the suggestive name of Pius XIII and brings back the papal tiara upon taking office. For a small but influential cohort of conservative Catholic intellectuals, many of us converts to the faith, Jude Law's Pius was the Roman pontiff we wished we had, a traditionalist with a revulsion for modernity, born of his own abandonment by his hippie parents. I never watched the show. I've only seen clips. I can't recommend watching the show. It seems like it was dramatic and, I don't know, scandalous. I don't know. I've never seen it. Let me know what you think. The Pope we got in real life was an Argentine Jesuit who couldn't stop talking about the climate, seemed to wink at divorce, and framed young traditionalist priests as Latter-day Pharisees who'd merely substituted Saturno hats for wide phylacteries. Yet, in retrospect, it's clear that Francis was just the pontiff we needed. The substance of his message was far more trad than critics appreciated, and his governing style had challenged us to practice what we preached about authority. Interesting. There's another article I'm going to link to in the show notes today as well. I'm going to go on and read the rest of that article in a minute, but out of the New Yorker, here's an article, Pope Francis tangled relationship with Argentina. One thing that's very interesting about the New Yorker's take on all of this is Pope Francis had the least approval rating in the entire world from his own home country. I just want you to let that, just ruminate on that. Just take that in for a second. He never went home to Argentina. I think that's tragedy. Why did he never go home? And out of all the countries, his approval rating was the lowest out of Argentina. Anyway, going back to this article at the first things. Start with the late pontiff's teaching, both in magisterial documents and his daily practice as universal pastor. Too often, the trads couldn't get past the surface to glimpse the rebuke to post-Enlightenment modernity at the heart of his teaching. Last year, for example, when Jordan Peterson chided Francis for prioritizing climate change at the expense of salvation, conservative Catholic outlets and personalities raced to cheer the Canadian pop psychologist. I've never been a big fan of Jordan Peterson personally. And by the way, Christ is king. There's no salvation outside of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church which Christ founded, and he is the only way to the Father. Just saying. Numerous episodes of this kind marked his pontificate, which saw the emergence of a veritable anti-Francis cottage industry, mainly centered in the Anglophone world. Learned commentators who should have known better joined forces with cruder trad influencers to prime a subset of Catholics against the Pope. Jake, which category do I fall in there? Am I a learned commentator or the latter? Anyway, don't answer that question.
I was going to say, do you really want me to answer that question?
We'll keep it hypothetical. The second
hey,
Francis,
you're the history student of the year. That makes you a learned commentator. Remember?
10th grade history student of the year, pal. Okay, don't ever forget that.
Exactly.
The second Francis would open his mouth to teach. The angry online replies and accusations of communism and worse piled up. You remember the guy with the communist hammer and sickle crucifix that presented that gift to Francis that he was so eager to receive? That sticks in my mind. Set aside the stewardship of the earth is a perfectly biblical injunction, whether one might agree or disagree with this or that policy agenda. As Rusty Reno pointed out in his tribute, Francis's social and environmental teaching, though occasionally garbled by the NGO-esque language in which it was couched, expanded his immediate predecessor's critique of Enlightenment reason. I witnessed this firsthand as part of a small group of journalists who joined the Holy Father on his 2019 journey to Abu Dhabi, marking the first time a Roman pontiff set foot on the Arabian Peninsula in defiance of a warning attributed to Omar ibn al-Khattab. I don't know how to say that. One of the Prophet Muhammad's closest companions, that on the peninsula of the Arabs, two religions shall not coexist. Speaking alongside the Grand Imam of Cairo and the Al-Azhar University, Francis railed against the modern logics of individualism and utilitarianism. In their place, he proposed an integral account of human development encompassing metaphysics, a continuation of Pope Benedict XVI's argument in his 2006 Regensburg address. In Ave Maria, Francis's book-length meditation on the Hail Mary prayer, the Pope likewise fulminated against the neoliberal elites who embody and enact a soulless modern logic. He described them as an elite that does not know what it means to live among the people, characterized by spiritual orphanhood and narcissistic individualism that deprives them and society at large of any sense of belonging to a family, to a people, to a land, to our God. This Franciscan line of thought culminated in his remarkable address to an emptied-out St. Peter's Square at the height of the COVID pandemic. While offering words of hope, Francis also scrutinized the pre-pandemic status quo, suggesting that modern man's quest for total mastery had led him to lose sight of our roots and the memory of those who have gone before us. In doing so, we have deprived ourselves of the antibodies we need to confront adversity. Golly gee whiz, we deprived ourselves of the courage we need to confront a modern world who wanted to lock the world down, prevent priests from hearing confessions and giving last rites to the dying in hospitals, and then to shame everybody for not wanting to get a shot that was attributed to abortion and abortion-tainted cells. Yeah, I remember that too. Anyway, it goes on. He added, quote, "We were not shaken awake by wars or injustice across the world, nor did we listen to the cry of the poor or of our ailing planet. We carried on regardless, thinking we would stay healthy in a world that was sick." All this amounts to a far more radical and systematic critique than most will find in the church's trad corners, where too often opposition to autonomy, Uber allies, doesn't extend beyond the abortion or gender clinic and to include the boardroom and the trading floor, where the purple-haired are afflicted, but not so men who coolly offshore jobs, asset strip firms, or deny workers a living wage. Francis not only saw more clearly the whole rotten structure, but called out the critics on their narrowness and, yes, rigidity. This doesn't describe all such communities, to be sure, and there is no denying that Francis went out of his way to skewer the whole lot, his slurs falling upon the guilty and innocent alike. He could be a mean dad. Still, negative polarization being the monstrous force that it is, the trad critics at times seemed bent on vindicating Francis's caricature of them, with the more fevered corners descending into full-on anti-Semitism, apologia for slavery, and soft sedevacantism, which brings us to the question of authority. The anti-Franciscan stood on tradition, which very much includes a broad, centralized church authority under Peter, even as they recoiled from the authority actually ordained above them, namely Pope Francis. In other words, they affirmed, or were supposed to affirm, the Petrine form but struck an oppositional stance to the substance of Peter's teaching, which is to say that they sought to have their cake and eat it too. It is to be hoped that whosoever is elected to succeed Francis will find, to his left and to his right, a fuller share of that fealty and mental docility expected of Catholics when dealing with Christ, vicegerent on earth. I'm not sure how to say that word. As for Francis himself, may he rest in peace and be joined to the fellowship of the Holy Pontiffs. You know, I get it. I do get it. I mean, people like me criticize people like Pope Francis very easily. It's easy for me to sit in my chair here and be a backseat quarterback, be an armchair theologian, or whatever. But the ultramontanist era that we live in seems naive at best to me. It doesn't do Francis any favors to pretend as though that everything that comes out of his mouth is fiat, just because he sits on the chair of St. Peter, just because he is the vicar of Christ or was the vicar of Christ on earth. I would argue, as James' epistle makes clear, that makes it more dangerous for him than anybody else on the planet. Because to those who are given much, much is expected, and who is given more than the successor of St. Peter upon earth? No one. No one. And yet so many are so eager to simply canonize him, when the greatest act of charity that we can do for Pope Francis, for Jorge Mario Bergoglio, would be to pray for his soul, to entrust him into the mercy of God and to the intercession of Our Lady and of the saints for his soul, and to hope and pray that he made a good and holy death, although the Vatican has never clarified that. The Vatican has never said one way or the other. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, the Vatican has never said he received last rites. I pray that he did. I pray that he did. I prayed that he died peacefully. But it doesn't do us any favors as to pretend as though the Pope, simply because he says it, it's all okay, good, and therefore has to be accepted as church teaching. That's not what Holy Mother Church teaches. That is not what Christ gave to us. That is not what Christ did on that beach in Galilee when he confronted his disciples and called them to himself. And Peter, with great zeal, takes the net and drags it on to shore by himself, when Peter will go on to beg God to have mercy upon him 3 times. We'll read that gospel probably on Monday. Let us pray for Pope Francis' soul, but pray more for the next guy who will wear the white and step out onto the balcony, that he will be truly faithful to Holy Mother Church and not cause the chaos that we've had to endure for 12 years. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and here are your headline news. Catholic News Agency reports Opus Dei postpones adoption of new statutes. The Catholic Personal Prelature Opus Dei has significantly reduced the scope of its 2-week General Congress that began this week due to the death of Pope Francis 2 days before the Assembly's scheduled start date. Opus Dei had planned to revise its statutes to conform to Pope Francis's motu proprio that subjected Opus Dei to the leadership of the dicastery for the clergy rather than the dicastery for bishops, and ended the practice of elevating the prelature of Opus Dei to the role of a bishop. The current prelate of Opus Dei announced that those statute revisions will now be delayed, and the General Congress will only focus on the administrative tasks, renewing the positions of the General Council and the Central Advisory. Ground News reports jury decides Norfolk Southern should pay for $600 million settlement. An Ohio jury found GATX not liable for the $600 million settlement with residents after the Feb 3rd, 2023 derailment in East Palestine due to a bearing failure on a GATX rail car. The accident released chemicals, causing fires and a large smoke plume from a vent and burn. Remember that? GATX claims that it complied with regulations and asserts that Norfolk Southern is solely responsible for the derailment and its consequences. Norfolk Southern must now pay the entire resident settlement amount. And LifeSite News reports Australian bishop allows obscene Hindu demonic idol in a cathedral. It's like the Pachamama thing. It's that bad. An Australian cathedral will be hosting an obscene art exhibit that features a Hindu idol with the bishop's approval beginning this week. The Transcendence exhibit, part of the Wands series of exhibits, features a Hindu deity with 5 wands representing a tarot card. With Bishop Shane McKinley's permission, the exhibit is scheduled to be on display at the Bendigo Sacred Heart Cathedral for the next 3 months. The first commandment forbids the honoring of any gods other than the one true God, who has revealed himself to mankind per the Catechism of the Catholic Church and natural law, by the way. A petition urging the bishop to remove the demonic idol from the cathedral currently only has 700 signatures. You'd think it'd have 1.5 billion, but it only has 700. Let that sink in. This is the problem. And those are your headline news. Boy, that angered me. Anyway, praise be to God in all things. We have our good friend of the show, Dr. Anthony Stine from returntotradition.org, returntotradition.org, linking to it in the show notes for you today. Dr. Stine, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me on again. It's always fun to be with you guys.
Yeah, boy. I mean, it's... okay, so you're not... I just want to start with this Hindu story because it is such an infuriating thing.
I have that on my channel today, too.
So you're not a trad bishop. So you're not like a super orthodox, like faithful, courageous. You're no Bishop Schneider. Fine, fair enough. But in what world do you go, yeah, let's let a demonic pagan idol hang out in our cathedral for 3 months? I can't see it. I mean, I can't see it under any circumstances. And yet over and over and over, they always surprise me. Why? Why, Dr. Stine?
Well, it's part and parcel of this synodal church. What I think is going to be one of the topics that the cardinals are going to have to talk about at the conclave. And many people will probably assume that they'll toss the thing out the window. Hopefully that's the case, but synodality is about devolution, decentralization, and the bishops. If you are a student of recent ecclesiological history, the history of the church, the bishops have wanted decentralization of authority from Rome since at least Vatican II. There was a big push for it at Vatican II. Paul VI managed to stop the worst of it. And part of synodality is, of course, ecumenical dialogue and understanding that, to quote the recently departed pontiff, God wills a diversity of religions. It's all there.
Yeah. This has got to end.
Pope Francis told, I believe it was a young Muslim, that they didn't need to convert. They just needed to focus on being the best Muslim they can be.
The best Muslim they can be. Right.
So in that kind of logic, you can then look at the more liberal branch of Hinduism, because every major religion has its orthodox and its more lax or liberal branch. And you would go, oh, you're pretty good people. You're good. You'll be okay. Jesus rewards good people.
And if I'm not mistaken, Jesus is one in their pantheon, right? Like I think I talked to a Hindu guy who converted from Hinduism to Catholicism, and I want to say he told me that they have no issue with Jesus because he's just one of many.
Yeah, I personally, for some reason, find it more offensive to reduce God to reduce Jesus to just another God in a pantheon than to deny him outright. For whatever reason, it just bothers me more because maybe we are just so used to people who deny Christ that it's almost passé to the point where young people, are taking theism of all kinds more seriously because being an atheist is like almost the norm right now. So it's an act of rebellion. I see that what you see going on there, and you see going on in other places too right now. There is no shepherd, so what will happen? The auxiliary shepherds, the bishops, essentially, they're going to run wild in places where they're inclined to do so. Out of Germany, we had the story, of the gay blessings, and you read the document. It's definitely not what Fiducious Supplicans. It's what Fiducious Supplicans probably intended, but did not make clear, so it gave people wiggle room. There's not ambiguity here. And out of Germany now is the announcement from the bishops that they intend to pursue married priests. Why are people shocked by this? Chaos is here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I find it fascinating that once Pope Francis dies, God rest his soul, the bishops in Germany are coming out with that. Now we're ready to come out with our version of implementing Fiducia Supplicans. And then the Opus Dei, of course, they're like, oh, well, there's no reason to continue on with this getting rid of our bishop thing that Pope Francis wanted. Instead, we'll just hold off on that and see how things go. And then, it's just like there's this steady news feed about how bishops all over the world are like taking advantage of this because, His Holiness has died. Now we're in the interregnum period, and I guess they can get away with it, I suppose. Do you think
right,
if we got a strong, do you think if we got a strong bishop stepping out on the loggia, let's just for the sake of the conversation say it's Schneider, just for the sake of the conversation, do you think he
that's
would?
My dream pick. Okay.
Do you think he would? Do you think he would be able to pull all of these reins back? Do you think he could pull it all back, even under the best of circumstances?
How willing would a hypothetical Schneider papacy be willing to use autocratic power that is within his means to do so? There has been a remarkable unwillingness to excommunicate heretics for the last 60 years.
Exactly.
I like Wakeland has definitely earned it. Mahoney. I mean, you got all these guys running around. So if they're not willing to use the power that they have, the way Francis was willing to use power to crush religious organizations and things, then this is why I am one of those who doesn't, like, I don't spend any time thinking about, oh, it could be this guy or this guy or this guy. Unless they are willing to come in and risk alienating the College of Cardinals after they get in, unless they're willing to risk earning a lot of negative feelings from the laity by excommunicating middling bishops or removing them from their offices, for kicking James Martin out of the priesthood, for seriously taking a look at suppressing the Jesuits again. Unless they're willing to do those things, I don't see how a moderate pope is going to do things. This is why I think the most dangerous thing that could happen would be a managerial pope, a moderate who doesn't call people rigid and all this stuff, who settles things down and then says, oh, but we're not going to really get rid of the problem element either. We're just going to not do controversial things. Do you want to be on here a year from now going, when is Pope X going to get rid of Cardinal Fernandez? Why hasn't he gotten rid of him yet? Why is James Martin out there doing his book tour and working with outreach publicly and not getting silenced? Why is all this happening? Why did this bishop get rid of these traditional nuns and not get into trouble from Rome? Why? Meanwhile, the new pope goes out there and shakes hands, smiles and says generally Catholic things in his homilies, but doesn't do anything. The church is in crisis, and a moderate approach is not going to solve the crisis. And has been in crisis for 60 years.
There was a day back in the day when bad bishops would be exiled. I mean, good bishops would be exiled too, because bad bishops would be in charge and the pendulum swung back and forth. But the practice was you would not allow the guy to stay in office. You would not allow him to continue to influence the daily life of the diocese, the Catholics at large. But that has shifted in modern times, the last 1,000 years. Now they don't get rid of the bad apples. They promote them. They keep them around. I've never understood that. Father Charles Murr has tried to explain it to me several times, and I could never wrap my head around that. But you're right. That is the order of the day. If Cardinal Sarah, and many people want Cardinal Sarah to walk out on that balcony. If Cardinal Sarah to walk on that balcony, I don't think he would fire Fernandez. I doubt it. Do you? You're seeing pushback now against the people hoping it's Cardinal Sarah. Aside from the fact that he turns 80 in 2 months, which means he's unlikely to be chosen just on that ground alone. And you think so? I think the opposite. I think they're going to want an old guy because that way his pontificate is short. Sure. Do they want an old guy who said he'd end the practice of married priests in the East if he had the ability to do so? Probably not. You think? Yeah, probably not. He's publicly said that. So I'm just saying I would love to be wrong about that but it's probably not going to be him. But wasn't even conservative on some things, sure, but he's conservative in that post-Vatican II way. He's a hermeneutic of continuity, Ratzingerian type, which means he's frankly a moderate. That's unpopular. But that makes him a choice. That makes them a reasonable choice then, right? Sure, but Cardinal, I've got it from trustworthy sources who are well connected to the church in Italy that Cardinal Zuppi is considered a moderate in Italy. So that's scary. Again, these labels don't mean all that much. That is scary. That should tell you this about the state of the church in Italy and how good we have it in the United States, but by comparison. Yeah. What I'm hoping for is either Pius XIII type pope. Don't watch that show. I have seen it. Don't watch it. There's definitely enough impurity that you would need a VidAngel cut of it if you could find something like that. But don't watch it. Clips are fine, but don't watch the show. But short of a pope who will come in and just tear down and cut out the rot with a chainsaw, then I want a mask off pope. I want a McElroy. Give me McElroy. Put him on the front of Peter. You want clarity and contrast. Absolutely. I want it unequivocal. I want these guys getting up there talking about the new synodal church and how we need to move on and become relevant and all that stuff in such naked terms that people realize that something has gone horribly wrong. Mm-hmm. I'd rather he be a little older than McElroy, though, so we have to deal with it for very long, like Supich. McElroy's 70. Supich is 75, 76. Supich is 76 years old. I'd rather have that because not to be ghoulish, but
if I have to say who's going to be around longer, it's not, if I have to choose my poison, I'm going to choose a guy who's not going to be around as long. Because I want more people to wake up, including a lot of those bishops who just keep their head down instead of addressing the problems. That
We're going to be
unpopular. I want that or the radical traditionalist. Those are my options.
Those are your options. What is your worst case? You said Schneider's your absolute dream pick, but what would be your worst case? What would be your worst nightmare pick?
My worst nightmare pick would either be the McElroy Supich, or have you seen the footage of Conclave going around the internet?
I played at the beginning of the hour.
Imagine in a bar. I think it's in a bar. He's sitting there on stage in layman's clothes singing Imagine by John Lennon. Imagine there's no heaven out of the mouths of a cardinal who's considered Papa Bilo.
I played at the top. I'll play it again on the other side of the break just to remind everybody. And there are caveats to it. I'll be fair. There's some fairness that needs to be here, but it's so cringe. And it's so atypical to Cardinal Tagley. God love him. I just can't imagine he's going to get the vote, to be honest with you. I just can't see it happening. But on the other side of this break, I also want to ask you about sort of like what is the feeling at the Vatican? The average worker at the Vatican. What are they thinking? What are they feeling right now? I think that's an important thing to get into as well. All of that and more with Dr. Anthony Stine from returntotradition.org. Mike McCormick still might join us for the after show a little bit, so more is coming. Share us with a friend. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. Praise be to God in all things. Cardinal Tagley singing Imagine. Now, the song version he sang didn't include some of the more blasphemous, heretical nonsense indicative of John Lennon and the Beatles. But nonetheless, and oh yes, of course, I know he's a karaoke nut. There, I mean, it's like the number one sport in Asia is karaoke. I get it. Why isn't he wearing his cassock one more time? Just remind me one more time why he's not dressed in according to his state in life, his office. I don't know, but it's just cringe. Dr. Anthony Stine, welcome back to the show. It's just one more video of Cardinal Tagley being somewhat cringe on the internet. I feel bad for the guy. Would
it be okay for me to come on and do karaoke of like some 80s death metal song with just the most problematic segments of the song lifted out, or are we beyond silliness like that? Because John Lennon was a character. Okay.
Well, to say the least.
The Beatles were the most dangerous boy band in all of history because of their influence they had and because of the things they did. And that's not a Beatles song, but John Lennon took that with him right into his solo career. The other Beatles members all mellowed out after that band broke up. You ever notice that? Like, no one talks about how dangerous Paul McCartney's solo career was or George Harrison's solo music was. But John Lennon, it's like he was like the zero patient for a cultural rot that took off. Yeah. And it's not so much because of rock and roll, but because of the things he said and the things he did.
You remember their connection to Aleister McCrowley?
Oh yeah. He's on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's album.
Right.
There's a big crowd of people on that cover, and he's there in the middle of it. Let me put it this way. The Beatles were big fans. 15, 20 years later, Ozzy Osbourne did a song called Mr. Crowley, where he says, Mr. Crowley, what went wrong in your head? Right? To paraphrase him, where he's literally calling the man insane. And so when Ozzy Osbourne has a firmer grip on reality than John Lennon, there's a problem there. Okay?
That's saying something right there. When Ozzy Osbourne is the brightest bulb in the room, you know you've got big problems. That's a sign of the times right there. Hey,
I don't mean to insult Ozzy. I can't. He seems like he's mellowed out in his old age, but man,
people say Tagley is papabile. I don't believe that. I'm not putting anything into it. I don't think he could get the vote. Do you?
I am trying to shy away from participating in this clickbait thing that I'm seeing a lot of people doing now, which is let's do profiles in each one of these guys, or let's give you who I think is going to be Pope. The word out of Europe is those who actually know what they're talking about with this stuff are perplexed that a lot of Catholic commentators in the United States are applying an American political lens to this and treating it like a horse race. About the only thing we're missing is a race to 270 map on the wall. And somebody made a meme out of that already. Okay. The only things we really know about what happens in a conclave is that because people have done the research and found out that, yes, they talk about geopolitical issues and they talk about the state of the church. In fact, they just had Zenit reported a couple days ago on the pre-conclave meetings. 113 of the cardinals were there. And one of the things they talked about was the state of the church and the state of the world, and the relationship of the church in its current state to the world. So we know these things factor in, but that's it.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know if the cardinals are really wanting a more mild-mannered version of Francis. And this gets to what do the people in Rome have to say? Well, some of the sources in Rome seem to say that there was a sigh of relief after Pope Francis died. But the people in the Roman Curia that it occurred to me that might mean that Francis was known as an autocratic manager, and that anybody's likely to come in after him, regardless of whatever they believe, who's probably going to know how to manage things in a way that respects the managerial class of Rome better. That doesn't mean it's going to, you might get somebody who is continuing his work, who is just better at managing the underlings.
So
that could cause them to breathe a sigh of relief.
So are you saying right now in this interregnum period, the staff at the Vatican, the average ordinary worker, are you saying relief?
Oh yeah. I mean, you see it expressed to some of the bishops, including Farrell. Cardinal Farrell was out there wearing ornate vestments for one of his public masses. Things that everybody pointed out you haven't seen out of the Vatican in 12 years. Wow. Just because people like the trappings of tradition does not necessarily make them orthodox. Cardinal Kevin Farrell is not exactly known as a strident defender of all things capital T tradition.
Yeah, we talked
and yet
about
he was out there
this week,
dressed to the nines. He would have fit in perfectly standing next to Cardinal Burke the way he was dressed. That doesn't mean anything. Right. I mean, again, Cardinal Zuppi is considered, by Italian standards, moderate to conservative. Because he prays a traditional breviary and he's not overly hostile to the traditional form of the Mass.
Okay.
But he is on the same page with Francis on everything else.
So we talked about your dream pick, and we've talked about your nightmare pick. Where's the middle ground? Who do you see the middle ground?
Probably somebody older who could manage things for, basically, think of a John the 23rd kind of situation again.
Mm-hmm.
John the 23rd mindset was very liberal. No, it didn't. And one of the things that has increasingly confounded me, I respect the man because of the changes in his position in the last decade or so. But those who've been around a long time and who pay attention know that Cardinal Mueller is not a traditionalist. He's a moderate to moderately conservative person. Something snapped that caused him to critique this past papacy. But he was not a traditionalist by any stretch.
And he also kind of went along with
traditionally minded who want him. James Martin.
Mueller went along with the process. Like, even though he was critical of it, he didn't resist it in any way.
Yeah. He said some weird things theologically in his past, but they're far enough in his past that I don't know if he's corrected them or not, so I don't tend to bring them up directly. But I would not be shocked if it was somebody like that. And then people would be like, oh, we're saved.
I was thinking the same thing. Mueller could be a serious contender as a compromise for all parties interested. I think he plays enough for all parties that they might be like, okay, that's our guy. They know he plays along. The more conservative trad crowd would be like, hey, we kind of like this guy. And then the other side's like, well, but he plays along. He doesn't rock the boat all that much. So there you go. And he's European. And that's the biggest voting block. The real question is, though, do they want another German? They just had one. Maybe they didn't like the last German.
Well, the other thing is, it's one of those things you hear from people who know that anybody who critiques a sitting pontiff in the hierarchy has their chances of being made pope go down dramatically. So who knows? I mean, that immediately eliminates all the bishops and cardinals who are generally on our more or less on our side of things. The ones that we would much rather have running the church than we had recently.
We're going to run out of time here. who's the curveball? Who's the surprise? When in 2013, when Bergoglio stepped out on the loggia, I didn't know who that was. I had to look that up. Is there a curveball surprise that you might want to bring to our awareness?
I mean, other than most of the people that are just unknown in general, I always joked about Hollerich becoming Pope. You could find somebody on the other side who would be the equivalent of a Hollerich, in terms of their people kind of know who they are. Again, Hollerich would be a mask off kind of person, but it's just not as known. Mario Gresh comes up also. He's just as bad. He and Hollerich ran the Synod on synodality.
I think it might be another sleeper.
Like they used to fight the new synodal church to give you an idea.
It's going to be another sleeper, another quiet cardinal hiding in the wings that's going to come out and be like, who is that? I have to look that one up. Dr. Anthony Stine, thanks for hanging out with us.
If that happens, look to see who's on the loggia with him.
All right. If you want to hang out with us in the after show, we'd love to have you. But guess who else is going to join us? We weren't able to get him on earlier because of technical problems, but he's back. Mike McCormick, author of An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. He's back on for the after show. We're going to be talking about a little bit about why Pope Francis never went back to Argentina in the after show on the live video stream. Go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT to get on that live video stream. Be part of the conversation. We'll see you on Monday. God love you. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Joe McClain here. A Catholic Take and all of our shows are made possible through the support of listeners just like you. And right now, we are in the middle of our 2025 Spring Appeal. The theme of our appeal is the gift of the Holy Spirit. Please support our 2025 Spring Appeal so that the Word of God may reach more people through A Catholic Take and all of the great programming here at the Station of the Cross. The most impactful way to support us is through our monthly giving program. With a monthly pledge, you will receive a special St. Benedict Decade Rosary with the Jubilee Cross Medallion. And whether you support us monthly or a one-time gift, we are deeply grateful for your generosity. And there are a number of ways which you can make this gift. Calling us 877-711-8500 weekdays 8 to 5 p.m. Eastern, or visiting our website, thestationofthecross.com, or using the donation page on your iCatholic Radio mobile app, or even just returning the envelope that was mailed to you during our Spring Appeal mailings. You can also donate during the on-air appeal, which will take place May 5th through the 9th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Regardless of when or how you donate, you'll be eligible to receive all the special thank you gifts, and you can view them at thestationofthecross.com. We couldn't be more grateful to have you on the team. Thank you, and may you and your family have a blessed Lent.
And we're back. Welcome to the after show, everyone. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, everybody. Good morning. Praise be to God. Good morning, everybody. Mike is here. Mike, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Joe. Thanks for getting me back on. Wow, this was quite a journey to get here.
I'm sorry it didn't work out. I wish it was easier. Sometimes technology is not our friend.
Well, we figured it out, and now we're talking. That's good. I gave me a chance to listen to what you were saying, and it was really interesting to me because I have a lot of interesting insights on kind of the article you're reading.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I thought that was hilarious for similar reasons that Dr. Stein, you thought it was hilarious. I watched your stream this morning, and you couldn't stop laughing.
Not laugh reading that. It was like the Star Trek Mirror Universe without the sense of style that they had.
That's right. It's so naive, in my opinion. It's so naive, but whatever. All right, so let me just give some shout outs, and then I want to ask you some questions, Mike, and get your take on some things here. But we've got a lot of great insiders hanging out with us this morning. By the way, share us with a friend. We'd love for you to share us with a friend. I want to get into this, well, especially why Francis never went back to Argentina. I thought the New Yorker, speaking of naivete, the New Yorker of all places, the New Yorker of all outlets, criticizing His Holiness Pope Francis, God rest his soul, as to why Argentina was the country that liked him the least. Let that sink in. His home country liked him the least. Anyway, Tato, good morning. Damon, good morning. Troy Lockett, good morning. You want to someone to say, okay, there's a LifeSite news article we're linking to, Troy, in the show notes about the demonic idol in the cathedral in Australia. That article will have that link. Go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Check out the show notes for today. You'll see it linked up there. Eileen, good morning. Sharon, you are amazing. Praise be to God. Thank you, Sharon, all that you do. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Jen, good morning. Jeff Burrier's on the team from sunny San Antonio. Good morning. T-Storm, Yvonne, Mary, Michelle, good morning. Mike K, Paul, our friend from Buffalo. Tato, good morning to you. Damon, praise be to God. James from sunny Romania, good morning. Gus DMH, KZ2. I'm trying to get away with wearing these glasses, and it's driving me absolutely mad. Honey West 25, good morning. Happy Friday to you. Sci-Fi, Nick, the mic, good morning. Good morning, everybody over on the YouTubes. Rob, our friend Flying Tigers, good morning to you. Praise Jesus in all things. We have the recipes. Michelle, Gregory, Alberto, Chase is here from North Borneo. Good morning from North Borneo as opposed to South. That's good. I'm glad you're here. Heather, good morning to you. Is the audio working properly for everyone else? I hope so. Judy is here. Good morning from SoCal, from sunny SoCal. Judy, we're glad you're on the team. Thanks for doing it. Heather Boniface, good morning. Barbara, you're amazing. One of our great insiders today. Praise God. Ron, good morning to you. All right, so Mike, Mike, I did want to ask you two things. One, I definitely want to talk about why he didn't go back to Argentina. But I also want to ask you about your remembrance as the White House stenographer under Obama when Francis visited the White House. Do you have any interesting insight or stories you could tell us about that?
Francis visited the White House in the fall of 2015. And at the time, I was working with Vice President Biden very closely. Well, that was shortly after his son died. So Francis, I think Biden met him on the tarmac at the Philadelphia airport, and they had a personal conversation about something. And then they came back into the White House, and once they come into the White House, then Biden fades in the background, and it's all about the Pope's interaction with Obama. So that was 2015. I went to the Vatican with Biden in 2016 in the spring. It was a very strange trip. Hunter Biden was on the trip. Hunter Biden was on the trip as he was making selfie porn with his dead brother's widow. Yeah. So this is a really kind of a dark period in the Biden family, and they connected with the Pope. He was there to talk with the Pope about sort of cancer research, the Vatican's view of cancer research. But really what I think it was in the background, Joe Biden was there to talk to Bergoglio about the rise of Trump. Joe Biden went on sort of a personal campaign around the world as Trump started moving up the ladder politically. And he had to talk to Bergoglio because, as I point out in my book, Bergoglio was installed into his position by Biden operatives. And he was he was helped along by the CIA Cardinal McCormick. So one of the reasons, to get to Argentina, why didn't he ever go back to Argentina? There's a big clue in the movie The Two Popes. And The Two Popes is actually something pretty significant that figures into other things you're talking about as you read that article. So the movie The Two Popes comes out in 2019, in the fall of 2019. It comes out as the Wuhan virus is released. I think it was released, not accident. And it comes out and immediately gets Academy Award notification because it's got this great story and these amazing actors. So it gets Academy Awards nominations. The two actors were Jonathan Pryce from England and then Sir Anthony Hopkins, both Englishmen, but they played beautiful parts. They were great, well acted. But it's a false story about how the papacy was handed off from Benedict to Bergoglio in this sort of chummy, communal way. And that's not really what happened. But they wanted us to think that's what happened. Hollywood and CIA work closely together. There's a lot of propaganda that comes out about that. So this movie comes out in 2019. The Academy Awards are held in February of 2020. The movie is out. It's playing around the world. There's a global audience. They see these clips. One of the things they say often in the movie is build bridges, not walls. Build bridges, not walls. That's anti-Trump. That's an anti-Trump slogan. And it's something that Pope Francis used in the 2016 campaign against him. It didn't work in 2016, but in 2020, what happened after the Academy Awards came out? A month later, Pope Francis walks out to the balcony in the Vatican and shuts down every Catholic service in the world. To lockdown, to smother religion. And why did he do that? Because there was a pandemic, they said. Now we're going to look back and see it wasn't really a pandemic. And I've got a lot of information in my book about why you have to look at it as not being really a pandemic. So he comes out and shuts down, and the damage that has done to the church has been almost insurmountable. People stopped going to church. They did mass on TV, and that's kind of a big chunk of the reason for the decline in the church. If you wanted to take over the church, keep people out of the church. I go to church every Sunday. I pray a daily rosary. One of the things I love about going to Mass, and this is different, this is my relationship with God. I build it through my Mass attendance because I hear the first reading and the second reading and the gospel read to me. And I get to sit in the pews and look around at the religious icons and the symbols and think about my relationship with God, just me and him. And that's where I strengthen my faith. When you remove people from that opportunity, you deteriorate the faith. And that's what Pope Francis did when he shut down the church. And you talked about it. Yeah. So back to why he didn't go back to Argentina, it's in The Two Popes. In the movie The Two Popes, there's a segment where they talk about him as a young priest in Argentina working with the dictatorship. And the dictatorship was backed by the CIA. There was a black mark against him in Argentina for what he did with the dictators. He is a Jesuit priest. He has Jesuit priests working for him. They're going into the poor neighborhoods, which are being recruited by the communists. And so the dictatorship backed by the right-wing military is backed by the CIA. And they're trying to eliminate the communists. And they used Bergoglio either as an informant or as a middleman. His position was always, I went and tried to help my friends. But two priests that he was working with, and this comes out in the movie, were kidnapped and tortured. And then they were let go. And they always, one of them forgave Bergoglio and one of them never did. And so Bergoglio took that into his papacy. And that's what the Two Popes movie, I think, was about.
Wow. The New Yorker said they're talking about his favorability ratings in the first paragraph, and they were talking about how high it is in America. I was very loved it, favorable in America. But it says, but in no country was the drop sharper than in his native Argentina, where last year his favorability had fallen 27 points below the 91% he had received at the time of his election a dozen years ago. So really crazy to see that in Argentina he was not well liked. And that a lot of people say is why he never went back to Argentina, because he knew he didn't have a great support base there. There was a lot of Catholics who were saying that there was a lot of mistrust of Jorge Bergoglio before he became Pope, and he never went back. Never. He didn't go back to say hello to his family, friends, nothing. It was he went to the Conclave and then never returned home. And I've always felt like
there's a lot of witnesses there.
That should be a red flag, right? That should be a red flag, I would argue, to everybody, not just some people, but to everybody, and just say, hey, you know what? That's something that's weird. That's just not right. That's not normal. Who doesn't go home? Even if you know there are people there that don't love you, of course. I mean, you can't make everybody happy, but if you never go home, but you've been to Brazil, you've been to all these other countries, Mexico, you've been to all over the world, but you've never been home? I don't know. It seems rather strange to me, to say the least. And it's never been asked. It's never been answered.
You and I and James Grine had a very interesting talk on your show last week, I guess.
Yeah.
Where James kind of hinted about this process that McCarrick was involved in out of St. Gallen, Switzerland in the late 40s. He talked about men moving out of Europe. McCarrick was working for the Vatican, moving men after the war in Europe around the world. If they were Nazis and they were being moved by the Vatican into Argentina, and Pope Francis, his family immigrated to Italy from Italy to Argentina.
Yeah.
I don't know when, but I don't know what connections he had back in Argentina and what connections were there in Argentina that he didn't want to associate with once he became Pope. So, there's a lot of darkness in his background. I appreciate a lot of the way that people are talking about praying for his soul. My personal opinion, based on what I've seen of what I've written about and what I've seen in the White House, working with people that were trying to do the best for the world and some people who weren't. I think it's God's will was done. God's will be done. God's will is being done. And we're moving through a conclave that's significant. One of the things we can talk about, so I get emails from the White House press corps, and one of the things I got was the schedule for the president for this weekend. So the president gets on a plane and President Trump and First Lady Melania get on a plane and fly to the Vatican. They fly to an overnight lodging in Rome tonight. They arrive around 10 p.m. And then tomorrow they get up, and basically the ceremonies start around 9 a.m. in the morning in Rome. That's about 3 a.m. here. And then they go till noon, and then he gets back on a plane and comes directly home. So President Trump is over in Rome, not meeting any other foreign leaders, just by himself. I think, though, there's a geopolitical angle, like what Dr. Stine was saying about how the Europeans are upset that the Americans have this sort of horse race mentality and a geopolitical thing. I think there is a horse race mentality and geopolitical thing. President Trump, with J.D. Vance's visit last week, just went to the Vatican on the most serious holiday of the Catholic calendar.
Yeah.
And they went and met directly with Cardinal Parolin and told him, we're not giving you any more money. We're not giving you money. And Trump, who's right now working around the world to promote trade opportunities for other countries, can use that as a leverage to say, you know what? We're going to talk to the people we do trade deals with about talking, those world leaders, talking to the cardinals in their countries. How are you going to vote for this next pope? Because we want a pope who is not globalist. We want a pope who is not pro-migrant, who's unleashed this migrant plague upon Europe. If you're a European and you want the Catholic Church strengthened, you want a pope in there who's not migrant and who stands up for it. One of the world leaders that President Trump has had a lot of association with is the Hungarian, what's his name? Orban, Viktor Orban.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know theology that well. I don't know Vatican politics that well. But I would put the Hungarian cardinal, I guess his name's Peter Erdo, I'd put him at the top of my list for somebody to look at as a dark horse.
Yeah, we were talking about him earlier this week as a potential, like a good choice stepping out on the loggia, somebody who might right the ship a little bit. I think in all the choices we have before us, because it's very unlikely that you're going to see anybody who's not from the College of Cardinals walk out. It's 99.9% sure it's going to be a cardinal that walks out, although it's not technically necessary. Erdo could be a good choice. Pizzaballa could be an okay choice. A lot of people want Sarah. In fact, Sister Anna Pauline, forgive me, over on the YouTube says, Joe, have you seen the petition to change to elect Cardinal Sarah to be elected? I've heard of this. I saw people posting it online, but a billion people could sign that, and that and a nickel would not mean much. Unfortunately, the laity have no say whatsoever in who gets to be the next pontiff or the bishop of your local diocese. Either by the way, I mean, I don't know. Jake, I don't know. I bet you'd have a contrarian opinion to mine on this. I kind of would like to see some element of the clergy of Rome, the faithful of Rome, the Roman citizens getting some say in who gets to be the bishop of their city, and therefore the successor of St. Peter on the chair of St. Peter as vicar of Christ on earth. I kind of want to see that again, but Jake, what would you say?
I don't know. I mean, the papacy has always been a complicated matter.
But the people used to have a say.
Yeah, they used to have a say. The emperor used to have a say. There's historically speaking, like this is similar to the issue with canonizations. Only this is an even more egregious thing for people to be like performatively outraged about. Like conclaves have always been political and messy and suspect. Like when was the last time there was ever a smooth conclave?
Yeah,
like just because people have suspicions about a conclave doesn't mean, like, if you want to declare to be anti-pope the winner of any conclave that was suspicious, we've probably had like 2 valid popes. Like seriously, in the history, like it's like this is what gets me is like, because people have this weird idea of like how it's supposed to work, and if it's not like perfect and ideal, then so I mean if we're I appreciate that thought, like it's. We should have a voice in who is the bishop. Like St. Martin of Tours didn't want to be bishop. He was hiding in a bush, and a goose honked and gave away his position, and the people grabbed him by force and took him off to make him bishop. Like the people did. Like this. Yeah. There's all kinds of stories about this from older days. So is he back? Yes, very good.
Let's get Dr. Stine back on the show.
Yes.
We're Dr. Stine.
Sorry, I had to go feed my kids.
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, that's okay.
That's understandable.
I'll let it go this time, Dr. Stine. I'll let it go.
Better not happen again.
Didn't they eat last week? Yes. Come on now. We were talking about you made a statement earlier about the European bishops, cardinals, sort of being like, "Hey, this isn't American politics, and you people need to stop treating it that way." But the reality is, they do treat it this way. Our mutual friend Rob told me that Malachi Morton once shared with him that the cardinals always go into the conclave already hanging out with their clique, already having a candidate in mind, and already knowing what his chief agenda ought to be. They're the number one item that he needs to focus on. They go into the conclave to begin the negotiations. It's a horse race for them just as much as it is for anybody else. To pretend otherwise is just silly. And so that's what we were talking about when you just joined us.
Sure, but there are charts out there that basically make it look like, here are your good cardinals. They're in red. Here are your bad cardinals. Yeah. They're in blue.
Exactly.
And now we're going to make it look like this is the Senate or the House.
Yeah.
And it's so annoying, especially since
doesn't make sense.
These things don't line up. I might talk about this a little bit over the weekend in a live stream where I found a much better one that describes like, Bergoglian pastoralists and all these other kinds of weird ways. And when you break it down that way, it becomes a very depressing image to look at, actually. But it still doesn't give you a clear-cut idea what's going to happen. Because that's part of the fun of being a Catholic during these times is you don't know what's going to happen. It could very well be that a whole bunch of Bergoglian-type bishops are like, yeah, this didn't work out too well for us, so let's go get the old guy moderate who will be there for 6 years or something and just shut these people down. And then we'll go find some young firebrand who will continue our work, but who's also much better at treating people who need to implement his program than Francis was.
Yeah.
Who knows? We don't know what's going to play out.
I mean, it's such a tall task, right? I mean, you got to have a guy who can govern. He's got to have the governing gene in him to be able to deal with all of the bureaucracy that is the reality of the Vatican City State and the church at large. You got to have a guy who understands what the church actually teaches and then be faithful to it.
That's why you're not going to get Conclave. You're not going to have Conclave for that not just for that one reason, but the managerial stuff. Like all the reasons his population rating went down for a few years ago was he was put in charge of some dicastery and it just went down the tubes, became a mess really quickly. So that might actually undermine him.
Yeah, Barbara brings up a good point. Barbara says, well, why wouldn't synodality require that the lay people have a say into who becomes pope? I know, right? For all of the, hey, let's listen to the masses. Surely there's no listening to the masses when it comes to who gets to be pope or the bishop of your local diocese. They just don't They don't want to listen to us. They want us to shut up, sit down in the pew, and put money in the basket, and that's the extent of our participation in the whole process. Is the Vatican broke? Right. Who's the best to fix that? Janice asked the question. Well, the Vatican is broke. And do you think that's a good question? Do you think, because I think I asked this to, I asked this to Bishop Strickland. Is the economy, the economics of the Vatican going to become the premier issue that the next guy has to solve? What do you think? Mike McCormick, let's start with you.
I'd say absolutely. Dr. Stine, your observation about how they've been having sort of conclave, pre-conclave meetings for a couple of months now is really indicative. I think they've been having pre-conclave meetings since Trump got elected and Pope Francis's health started to decline. And so look what actions were taken. They took the funding straight away from the Catholic Church by the billions. And then they sent J.D. Vance over there to tell them, you're not getting any more. So now the church has to struggle its way into figuring out, well, now what do we do? Are we going to start selling off properties? Are we going to go back to our beleaguered laity and ask for more money? I mean, that's not working. The word about what the bishops did with and the cardinals did with the NGOs and this human trafficking along the southern border is travesty to a lot of us, me including. So what does the church do? If they want to survive as a church, they're going to have to come up with, I think, what Dr. Stine just described is probably exactly what they're going to do, is they're going to go with kind of a middle-of-the-road person, and hopefully they can retrench and figure out to get one of their more progressive ones in later. I think that's probably what we'll see happen.
So, Dr. Stein, do you think the economics?
Yeah, and the best picture, there are probably a couple of ways you can get the money back, or fill in the funding gaps if you're looking for a pope to do that. And one would be Parolin. The China deal is rumored to could come with a big hefty price tag. Don't be shocked if they look to him for that kind of leadership. Or maybe sanity will prevail and somebody will find a persuasive way of telling the middle of the road kind of cardinals that if you just let restore the church's actual teaching charism and have the church courageously tell the truth in the world, you will have the laity open up their purses and wallets again.
I don't know.
That may come with a very hefty price tag of a different kind to do that. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to give people a sign of hope here, just because you never know. It could be that Syrah or Burke will stand up on that stage, at the Loggia.
Yeah,
Burke. I don't think so. It could happen. Again, remember,
Sarah, I can see Burke.
One thing nobody disagrees with, which is that if a cardinal opens his mouth, starts taking on the Pope and hitting at the Pope while he's in office, then when that Pope is gone, that cardinal usually doesn't have much of a chance at the conclave. Mm-hmm. It's usually viewed very dimly, even though you'd think Francis is the exception to many rules on that.
Eldridge Yorkshire says, vote Father Ripperger for Pope. I don't think he'd take the job even if we did vote for him, if I'm being honest. I don't see him wanting the job. Would you?
Can you imagine the National Catholic Reporter's reaction to that? No, that'd be fantastic.
Oh man, I will never forget in 2013 when Bergoglio stepped out onto the loggia. I said this yesterday. I didn't know who he was. I was like, "Who is this?" This is all news to me. Like, wow. And then I had to look into him, and I still wasn't black-pilled. It was still too early for me to be black-pilled, so I was really naive in those days. And then I remember listening to NPR. I work full-time in Catholic radio, but I had tuned into NPR just to see what they were saying. And I remember listening to them have this guy on one of their programs, a young Catholic, and he was saying, well, for years, I felt like the Catholic Church was nothing but resistant to me. Now I feel like it's wind in my sails, like the wind at my back. And finally, we have a Pope who who was on our side. And I'm just like, oh, that's a bad sign. I remember thinking like, that's bad. Like, this can't be good. I don't know who Bergoglio is, but that ain't good.
I got some angry comments this morning because right after my little thunder and lightning intro, right to a clip from The View.
I saw that. I was like, what are you doing? Like, you're breaking all the rules.
That on your channel. I'm like, it's the equivalent of if I was using that NPR clip or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
It's the same level of evil.
Yeah.
You have to know what the other side is saying.
I was on Newsmax earlier this week. I'm supposed to be back on Newsmax tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. So we'll see. But, everybody was like, oh, he's great. He was wonderful. He was a good man. One priest, one senior's like, oh, yeah, he's already in heaven. I'm on there and I'm like, pray for his soul because he did grave damage. So I'm like, somebody's got to say it like it is. I mean, the guy needs your prayers. Let's pray he died well so that he goes to heaven. But man, I am, for one, glad that his pontificate is over, even if I am praying for his soul. Beverly, good morning to you. I was suspicious when he stood there for so long and didn't speak. Back in 2013, I was a noob. I mean, like, I just felt very naive and I didn't think the worst until later. It wasn't until later. Somebody wants Padre Peregrino, Eagle Hawk Panther from New Zealand. I'm guessing that's New Zealand. Wants Father David Pellegrini for Pope. You're talking about Padre Father
Dave Nix, you mean?
Father Dave Nix? Is that who we're talking about for Pope? Could you imagine? I just had him on the show a couple weeks back. Yeah, it'd be good. Guy went to prison.
I don't think you'd like how he would remind people the reality of the four last things and some of the things he'd say about the sacraments and other unpopular things. But if you want a pope of separating the sheep from the sheep from the goats, he's your man. But a non-cardinal hasn't been picked in like 600 years.
Yeah, not going to happen. Not likely. I mean, it's possible, but not likely. Mike, one thing I'm thinking about from your perspective would be, I would personally like to see, I'm not the biggest Trump guy in the room. Both Dr. Stine and I did a live stream for the election night. We expressed both of our criticisms and our endorsements for the Trump administration. But I would love to see some actual transparency coming out of the Vatican for a change. I would love to see the reality of what the Vatican did and didn't know about McCarrick. And especially his collaborations with both the Central Intelligence Agency, the State Department, Joe Biden, the Obama administration, and more. His collaboration with Cardinal Kevin Farrell, Wuerl, Gregory, Cardinal Gregory, the former Cardinal DC, now McElroy. I mean, I would love to see that transparency, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, and we'll see where it's God's will be done. We're talking about how we approach the death of this Pope as a human being, but also as this person who did tremendous damage to our world. So God's will be done. And where I went to church and at church on Easter Sunday, the sermon was really good. Basically, the priest took a passage that Pope Benedict had written about faith, how Jesus is the light of the world and our faith is helping us in this light of the world. But Pope Benedict made the example that our faith is really the light of a candle where you can only see one step at a time. And I thought that was really good for Easter and for where we are with everything. That was before Pope Francis died. So Pope Francis died the next day, and here we are taking our faith one step at a time. So, yes, we'd love to see transparency. We'd also love to see just the Pope be elected to lead a church that's saving souls. I've been back and forth with Archbishop Pagano, and I talked to him. I said, Archbishop Pagano, I think if I would consider it an example of somebody who is a good pick for the Pope if they promised to unexcommunicate Archbishop Pagano. And he got back to me and he said, look, I don't think it's something that's going to come through the church. It's going to come through an investigation by the White House into exactly what you're saying. So that's where the evil is to be undone. It's not going to come through the Curia. It's going to come through an investigation of the evil that was perpetrated into the church. And it wasn't just the CIA. There are other intelligence communities that infiltrate the Vatican in unhealthy, unholy ways. It's a collection of men, and it's imperfect. So we live our communion with God as strongly as we can. Going to our church strengthens it. Going to our Mass strengthens it. Taking communion in church and Mass strengthens it and holds it in place. Praying, I pray a rosary every day. That strengthens it. And so that's what we want to do. But we do need help from the secular world to stay out of it, right? Separation of church and state. I can imagine, though, it's a healthy
because
thing.
There is a call for a RICO investigation, and I don't know that Trump will actually ever do that. But if they did, I can imagine that the Vatican would, by default, just claim political immunity because they're a foreign state. I could just see them, no matter what, just saying, "Hey, we're not gonna engage in this. We're not gonna participate in any way, shape, or form." But so, to what extent can a RICO investigation actually bring fruit? I mean, I suppose they can investigate NGOs in America. They can investigate probably some of the prelates here. But as far as the Vatican goes, I can't imagine, no matter who walks on that balcony, that they're going to play along with that. Would you say it's fair?
I would say that they can. Well, J.D. Vance went to the Vatican last weekend. He confronted Parolin. We had the smiley face photos. Oh, we had a great meeting. I think behind the scenes, he told Parolin, "You're not getting your money. You're not getting any more money until you guys shift your view."
They asked about that.
That's and knowing what I know about White House trips, so that J.D. Vance trip was set up a month in advance. At least they have to pre-plan those things. Yeah. And so that they set that trip, and they put that into stone. I mean, Prime Minister Meloni of Italy went to the White House on the Thursday, and then J.D. Vance and she meets President Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office, and then the very next day J.D. Vance goes to Rome and meets her again, and has a high-profile meeting there. That's unheard of. Why do they have the same world leader back-to-back meeting basically the same guy in two different places? And I think the reason is because the trip that J.D. Vance was set to take to Rome was set in stone long before she said, I want to come to America. And Trump said, "Yeah, sure. Come on in. Here's a good day. Let's do it." And then JD's going to meet you. And she's like, "Okay." And then he goes into the Vatican. That's what the real intent of the trip was. And so there's your confrontation. I don't think there will be a RICO investigation. I think it's already been done. And I think J.D. Vance brought them the results and said, "This is what we're doing to you. Get with the program."
Well, money motivates a lot of things, doesn't it? And we talked about that a little bit ago, about whether or not the economics of the situation will be the primary motivating factor for cardinals to make it their decision, in which case which cardinal represents the greatest ability to raise the funds necessary to recover. Because if they're going to lose all this money out of USAID and other sources, then the China deal becomes, as you said, Dr. Stine, more important, which brings us to another point. You had Cardinal Zen complaining this week that they were pushing things at a rapid pace before cardinals could show up. He's now going to be there for the funeral, praise be to God, so he's now getting involved. You've got other Chinese bishops remaining eerily silent post death of Pope Francis. They're not even issuing public statements wishing condolences like the rest of the world is. Well, what do we make of that? I mean, I think that's very interesting. So, and then there's like a letter coming out of Christine Niles. I think Christine Niles reporting a letter from Chinese priests begging the world to pay attention and to vote for a pope who will bring relief to the suffering of the Chinese Catholics. So I think the China question could be premier out of this conclave. Dr. Stine, what say you?
if I were Cardinal Parolin, I would hope that's not the case, because he worked with Ted McCarrick to make that deal a reality.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that could be his biggest stumbling block is the church in China. There are certainly cardinals in Africa and in the United States and in the West who don't want a closer relationship with China for the church. So we shall see. I think that's good that Christine Niles is bringing that letter to people's attention. That needs to be seen by people. They need to be aware of what's going on there, because there are people who think, well, the Vatican okayed them, so they're valid bishops. Really? Okay. Again, these are people even aware of what Mass looks like in China? They've edited the Bible there to put messages from Mao and Dear Leader in their Bibles.
Wow.
They've often, in a lot of places, taken crucifixes out of the parishes and put up pictures of Xi Jinping.
Huh.
They have rewritten the Gospels to turn them into parables about being good citizens. I mean, it's not Catholicism. I don't know what it is, but it's not Catholicism. It's just a Christian-looking state worship. That's all it is.
Wow. Jennifer O'Donnell Ferry, good morning to you. Nicole Andrea says, what a way to wake up. Today's show was something else. Well, thanks for hanging out with us and being on the team today. Don Franco was here. Praise be to God. What is this about Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York, has been calling for a RICO investigation into the previous administration for over 3 years. He has been canceled. Yeah, he took a beating after the 2016 election. Oof. Or the 2020 election, rather. He took a beating. I don't think he's ever recovered from that. We'll see how it goes. Patty, good morning again. Thanks for hanging out with us today. By the way, Yvonne, you're amazing. Yvonne, one of our great insiders. Good morning to you. Thanks for hanging out. Moni says, we belong to a church that has allowed China to represent a false Catholic religion. Yes, we have. That's part of the grave scandal over the past 12 years. And, I don't think you need a guy. Like I said, you don't need a guy who is like, you don't have to have the Bishop Schneider. You can just get a guy who is faithful to the church. He's not going to create grave scandals. He's not going to say crazy things on airplane rides. He's not going to sign documents that are absolutely wackadoodle. He's not going to appoint men to high-ranking positions who will do the wackadoodle. He's not going to do any of those things, and he's certainly not going to participate with the eras of Russia that have spread through China and around the world today. China is a bad actor. I mean, through their Belt and Road Initiative, they have basically seized control of most of the planet at this point. Most of these governments, they're in bed with China, whether they want to be or not, or whether, regardless of what they say on the news, they are in bed financially with China, and China is going to reap the rewards of all of that effort. All of this, while the last 12 years we played nicey nice and allowed CCP to appoint bishops, and we're just recognizing them, and then they arrest good ones, and we just turn a blind eye and say nothing. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. You need a guy who will just slowly and steadily start to undo that. But here's, I guess, the $64,000 question. We sort of touched on this on the radio side, Dr. Stine. You can't get a guy who's going to go real hardcore right away, or else the rupture becomes grave, don't you think? He's got to be able to turn things around. He's got to be able to move the ball, but he's got to do it in a way that doesn't rupture and create vast schism within the church. Or do we care whether or not the left breaks off and, essentially, maybe it already has. I don't know. What do you say?
We have been in a de facto schism for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I don't know if a good pope playing nice for a year is going to do much to assuage that.
You're saying the damage is done?
Yeah. I mean, the German bishops announced today that they're going to pursue married priests. They just issued a document on how they're going to give gay blessings. I mean, they don't care. I've got a contact who's a priest in Germany who's like the schism, church in Germany's in schism. I hope it doesn't last. There's a de facto schism. This is why I prefer my ape of the church thesis, since Fulton Sheen and a bunch of mystics all said the same thing, that at some point there'd be a false church built over the real church. The real church they would try to dismantle from behind the false church. That's what it looks like. So if we're not living through that, I don't want to be around when the real thing happens.
Well, let's spitball that then, because let me just compare that to Donald Trump. So Donald Trump comes in office, high favorability, like highest ratings ever. And then all of a sudden we have immigration, and then can we take this? I'm not so sure. All of a sudden people start asking the question. Now you got tariff wars. And now people are really starting to ask the question, golly gee whiz, I'm losing money out of my back pocket. I don't think I can tolerate much more of this. And his favorability starts to wane.
A lot of the reporting on his approval ratings waning are based on extremely dubious polling firms that people are suddenly trusting for some reason. When they went going into election day, they made it sound like Kamala Harris was going to walk away with it. So I would, because some of the other ones that were more accurate during that election were still saying his approval is hovering at like 50%, give or take.
I remember saying on election night, how much will the base support Donald Trump when it gets ugly, when the immigration situation gets ugly? He talked about tariffs, but I didn't even think it was get this bad, honestly, even on election night as it is now, because he's already talking about pulling back on some of the tariff wars against China in particular. I don't think China's going to play fair. I don't think they're going to. China's playing to the death. And I think it's an all or nothing thing. And if Donald Trump doesn't go all the way through with it, then I think he might come out badly on that. But the reason why I bring it up at all is to compare.
Increase on tariffs last night, by the way.
Yeah,
on Chinese tariffs.
But just to compare him to, say, you get a guy who walks out on the loggia who's he's everything you want him to be. He's pretty hardcore, and he starts wielding the papal hammer, and you're going to get massive pushback. It's going to get ugly and fast. And when it does, I got a feeling that there's going to be a lot of people whose faith may be in jeopardy because they don't have the fortitude to endure that ugliness, and they might walk away from holding the church.
I want people to come out there and blatantly say that they believe the Bible is wrong about homosexuality. I want them to admit it verbally instead of dancing around the issue. I want them to admit they think the church was wrong, because when they believe that, they categorically are saying that the church was not guided by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. That
they're believing some Protestant fantasy about a Babylonian captivity and all this other nonsense. It's time for them to stop dancing around the issue. I want a pope to come in and excommunicate the homosexual priests who because there's near perfect correlation when you look at the abuse cases with them. I want someone to come in and crack heads. It's time to rip the Band-Aid off. But unfortunately, it's not the problem. That I cannot identify the figure in the College of Cardinals who will do that. I can see the hardest core of them would be Burke, and he's kind. I don't want a Bergoglian on the right, but someone needs to wield papal power to defend the church, because there has been a rot in the church for a very long time, going well before Vatican II. Who thought it was a good idea? How did Annibale Bugnini get to the position he was in to wreak the havoc that he did on the church 3/4 of a century ago? How did that happen? The groundwork was laid a long time ago for what we're dealing with
now. Jake is quietly chatting in the background here. Tragic Burden. Your dark horse is it Cardinal Francis Leo from Canada? Is that who you're?
No, I don't think it's going to happen. I'm just putting the name out there.
Is that the guy?
Is that the one? So I can take credit for the prediction when it does happen, which is not going to happen.
But that's the one we're talking about. Is Cardinal Francis Leo from Canada?
Yes.
He's a young dude. He's only 53.
Yeah, he's too young. That's why it's not going to happen.
He's only 53.
Too young.
Now, is he
depending on who the next pope is? He could be Papabile next round. But. Is he
our Pope Lenny?
I don't think he'll be quite that rad, but I think he's better than he might seem on the surface when you're like, oh,
he's
just probably just moderate. Like, you don't get appointed Archbishop of Toronto without being like a raging liberal. Like I think we overestimate sometimes how many of these cardinals are raging progressives.
I don't know, man. He's from Canada.
Yeah.
And he's from Toronto.
Kennedy Hall is also from Canada. Like, what's your point?
Okay, fine. Fair enough. Sure.
There's a difference between a layman and someone who manages to get through the hierarchy and through seminaries that are open secret if you're too conservative or too straight.
I have a few Canadian sources. That's all I'll say.
But 53, that's another JP2 pontificate.
He's too young. Exactly. That's why he won't. That's why I'm saying it's not going to happen. But I'm putting his name.
Hold on. But they said that before they elected him too, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they probably said the same thing. Oh, he's too young or whatever. But then they elected him. So it's not beyond the realm. I mean, it does happen. It just is infrequent because they don't want a 25, 30-year pontificate. And if Cardinal Leo here is healthy, then that's a 40-year pontificate, almost. Maybe 35, could be 33 decades plus. It's possible. I mean, he's from Canada. I'm sure he only eats good food. Who knows? But not likely. So you just want to be on the record now to say that this is you want to be able to say, I told you so if it happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's not going to happen. But I got to get the name out there on the record as like,
just in case.
Told you so.
You told you so.
It's all part of the game.
You know, Mahoney's still alive. We never talked about Cardinal Mahoney. He could be the dark horse.
Mahoney
90 years old. He only ruled for 2 years.
Mahoney's back in the news.
Is he? What did he do this
He's
time?
the oldest. He's like the senior cardinal now, which means he gets pride of place at Pope Francis's funeral tomorrow.
You're kidding.
I wish I was.
Well, hold on.
Unless somebody pulls some strings, unless the Camerlengo pulls some strings and says, this is going to be a really bad look, you should voluntarily step aside for anyone else.
Mahoney, he's senior because how long he's been a cardinal or senior because of his age? Because there is an older one.
So I think it's how long he's been a cardinal. I don't know. All I saw in passing in the news over the weekend that you're going to see him at the funeral or at some other major funeral related event because of his seniority or his age.
He's 89. Mike McCormick, talk about connecting the dots. You can't get a McCarrick if you don't have a Mahoney. You can't get a Mahoney if you don't have a Bernardine. I mean, it goes back. Yeah.
Well, I think you're starting to really hit on this when you talk about the ape of the church. You're starting to really hit, and this conversation we had with James Grind going back to St. Gallen and the activities of the Vatican in St. Gallen in the post-war era. I mean, I think there's been a culture capture by globalists. The early version of the globalists came out of the CIA. And I mean, I looked into the JFK files and there is testimony by this guy, James Angleton. He was a senior spy master. He was the bureau chief in Rome in the 40s and 50s. He worked with then Secretary of State Montini, who became Pope Paul VI. So that was the guy who was the, like you said, he was the guy who bumped McCarrick up the ladder. Right. And so,
and there was the document, the CIA document that was trying to influence the conclave to elect him.
Yes. So, there's been influence by intelligence agencies into the Vatican since post-World War. And through that, and part of that influence comes through their connections in Hollywood. These movies, all this, this TV shows that we see. And so the culture is being moved and the church is being subverted at the same time. And this has been a 40 or 50-year process. And all of a sudden it came to a head. And it was used against us when the shutdowns of this fake pandemic were launched. That came out of China. So I hope China doesn't have a big say in this conclave, because if they do, that'll be a global tragedy of immense proportion. But God's will be done. We'll see what happens.
By the way, guess who is the youngest cardinal who's going to be voting? This is crazy. This is a guy out of Australia, Cardinal Mykola Boychuk. I don't know how to say that. Bychok? By Bychok. I don't know how to say that. He's 45 years old. He's from Australia. 45. Could you imagine? The oldest is 99 years old, not voting, probably not even showing up. He's Cardinal Estanislao Esteban Carli, and he's from Argentina. Oh, he may show up just to make sure he's getting some say into the pre-conclave conversation. If he's from Argentina, he probably knows where all the bones are buried. So from 99 to 45, that's a heck of a spread. The oldest guy is twice the age of the youngest guy, at least. That's a heck of a spread. Wow. Besides, okay, so we've mentioned some of the dark horses. We've also talked about some of the outliers. But I think a lot of people are still hoping it. I mean, obviously Cardinal Sarah is from Africa, but besides him, is there anybody else, Dr. Stine, from Africa, Asia? Besides Togli, we've talked about him. Besides Sarah, we've talked about him. Is there anybody else you would say would be an okay, fair enough choice out of Asia or Africa?
Okay. I'm skeptical of the African bishops because the African bishops as a group have asked the Vatican to reevaluate the church's teaching on polyamory because it doesn't fit the culture of Africa. Yep. So I don't hold the church in Africa to the same level of esteem that a lot of others do.
Mm-hmm. That's why I put him in the okay category. A little bit.
I found some official reporting on Mahoney. He's going to play a key role in the closing of the Pope's casket, a solemn ceremony that few people have seen. After the Pope lies in state, there's a formal closure of the casket, sealing of the casket, because that is the last time the Pope will be seen by anyone forever. He said that himself to ABC 7 Los Angeles.
He's going to be the last one.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's fitting. I'm going to argue that's fitting.
Yeah.
They go hand in glove.
Well, he lives on in the Two Popes movie.
He does.
That version of him.
Stephen S. asks Mike, do you have any comments on the Fauci factor as regards to the Wuhan CCP attack? How do you feel about Dr. Fauci, Mike McCormick?
Fauci was an integral part of it. So in the book, I kind of document the Wuhan pandemic started in 2011. Joe Biden went to China and got in front of a Chinese audience, and I was there with him, and he told them they have too many old people. You have too many old people because they had this one-child policy for so many years. So that meant that they could only have one baby for every 4 grandparents. So it got to the point where there's only one person in the workforce for every 4 grandparents. You have too many old people. 9 years later, this is August 2011, 9 years later is about when, 8 years later is about when the Wuhan pandemic was launched. Fauci at the time was working with EcoHealth Alliance on something called Predict One. They had teams going around in China looking for viruses that could become SARS viruses. And they found some. And they worked with a company called Metabiota. Metabiota was an investment by Joe and Hunter Biden after they met with Xi Jinping in China in 2013. I was on that trip too. So this is all in the book. Fauci had an integral role to play in the development of viruses that could be used as pandemic weapons. And they were used. They were tested. It was tested in Africa. That's what Ebola was. Metabiota was in Africa in 2014 when Ebola broke out. And as a result of Ebola breaking out, Ron Klain was named the Ebola czar by President Obama, whose vice president was Joe Biden, and Ron Klain was Joe Biden's chief operative. And who did Ron Klain make into a healthcare superhero for saving America from the Ebola crisis? Anthony Fauci. And that's when everybody began to believe Anthony Fauci should be trusted above all other healthcare people. And that's what led to the Wuhan pandemic in 2020. That's right.
He is science. He is science. I never understood, though, why Donald Trump never just fired him. You know, I couldn't understand that. Fire the guy. Just get rid of him. He was criticizing him. Just get rid of him.
I think at that point, so many people were telling him trust this guy. And I think at that point, Trump all of a sudden realized this is coming and it's been in the works. And, I pretty much detail in my book the process they went through. It started as soon as Trump got elected in 2016 in November. It started in the Obama White House and went on through. And Ron Klain was a chief proponent of it. And then when it hit in 2019, the establishment in Washington was not backing Trump. And, you can't be one guy against a huge force. So he did the best he could. He fixed the economy as best he could in the aftermath. But the media was against him and everything was against him. And so we had to go through it and we learned from it. But we didn't stop looking at it critically and thinking about it. And, I'd written a book called Joe Biden Unauthorized in 2020. And I had just a surface understanding of Joe Biden. I just thought he was a weird, creepy politician who was strange and probably corrupt. But there was nothing I could figure out. Once I got a laptop in 2021, that's when I saw the corruption. And then the corruption became downright evil. And when I saw the White House visitor logs that showed the meetings between McCarrick and McDonough and Biden and Obama as they laid out the betrayal of the Chinese Catholics, the implementation of a disastrous Iran nuclear deal into the Middle East, the human trafficking, the toll of human trafficking along the southern border, that's when I understood it was just downright evil. And that eventually became Wuhan pandemic. Trump came in 2016. Trump came in 2016 and started talking about we're building a wall. And Pope Francis went to Cuba and he went to Mexico in February of 2016 and did a political event for the Democrats from Mexico to talk about how terrible it was to build a wall. And he said, we want to build bridges, not walls. And they used that in the Two Popes movie, all throughout that movie. On the flight home to the Vatican, one of the reporters asked Francis, what about this guy Trump? He's the candidate for the presidency. He's talking about building a border wall. And Pope Francis says, I don't know this businessman, but if he's talking about building walls, not bridges, he's not a good Christian. That's a political operative. That's not a pope. Mm-hmm. And that is what Trump was up against from the beginning. And so this is what we have to get out of the church.
Francis was not dumb. Francis was very smart, in my humble opinion, and he knew what he was saying. He knew the power and the weight that he was saying it because he is the vicar of Christ on earth. By him saying that, it carries grave weight, and it was intentional, in my opinion, as part of his Peronist training and background. College Wiz, one thing I have to say, though, is Donald Trump's supposed to be the art of the deal guy, but he gave $1 billion of American taxpayer money to Big Pharma, who then stabbed him in the back and then stabbed the rest of us. And it didn't go well. And, and I got to say, that was just incredibly disappointing from my perspective on Donald Trump. There's a few other things I would say I'm disappointed in Donald Trump on, but that's just one of them. He should be smarter than that. He just should have been smarter than that. And he wasn't. He seemed very gullible in that regard. And now many people are paying the price. Some of them are paying it with their own very lives. Others are paying it with their jobs and having to rebuild from scratch because they didn't want to get that shot. And then, of course, Pope Francis doubles, triples, and quadruples down on that by guilting Catholics into trying to get that and shaming the rest of us. And then I remember a bishop in Beaumont, Texas, at a men's conference I was speaking at during his homily, guilt everybody. Oh, you got to get it because, by the time you get to the hospital and you're dying, it's just too late for you. And we're going to say, hey, we told you so. And I was like, that is disgusting. That is just disgusting that you would do that. But they did, and they did, and they kept doing it for 2 or 3 plus years. God help us all. We're going to run out of time here. I only have 2 minutes left before we have to say goodbye. I want to get a comment from each of you on this next. I would have liked to have started this earlier, but we're running out of time. We got to say goodbye for Friday. The Zionist issue. That's becoming more and more of a big deal. I think it's going to become a greater deal in the days to come. Pizzaballa, is he the only one speaking to this issue? Is there anybody else, Dr. Stine?
I'm not aware of anybody else speaking to the issue. I wonder if he would even have a chance, given he has taken a view that some who would say is less than deferential to Israel. And that's a dicey subject, especially when you start putting Vatican II documents into this, like Nostra Aetate and other things. He's coming perilously close to a third rail, essentially. Again, if we're looking at this politically.
But there's no one else. Is there anybody speaking on the opposite side of the issue as a Pizzaballa?
To my knowledge, no. But I mean, we've heard plenty of rhetoric from people in the hierarchy about Palestine and Palestinians and things. So I don't know if his position would make him unpopular or if his age would make him unpopular. He's 59. That's remarkably young for a pope these days.
Yeah, it is pretty young. But all right, Mike McCormick, last words. What do you say? The Zionist issue. Do you think there's anybody? You think it's going to become a premier issue for consideration at the conclave? I think it's become a global issue, and it's going to become a bigger one.
I personally don't. So McCarrick and Obama went to the Vatican in 2014. Weeks after that, Bergoglio and McCarrick together go to the Holy Lands to promote the Iran nuclear deal. And they didn't talk to Netanyahu. They talked to moderates in Israel, and they talked to Jordanians, and they talked to the West Bank people. So I think there's that's the side. Bergoglio is out now, and I think they've got to look at fixing what Bergoglio messed up in the Middle East.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're all going to find out in the days to come, but we're going to need to wrap it up for this weekend. I'm looking forward to being back on Monday, but tomorrow I will be on Newsmax in the 9 a.m. and 10 Eastern a.m. Eastern time zone, probably commenting on the funeral and my thoughts on the conclave. So that ought to be interesting. Hopefully I don't get myself in too much trouble, but we'll be back. We'll be back on Monday for another round. Praise be to God. Father Charles Murr is on the hook for next week. I'm looking forward to having him back on the show. But Mike McCormick, author of An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Plandemic. I'll link to it in the show notes today. But Mike, thank you for your time. Glad to have gotten you back on to the after show for our extended conversation. God bless you, Mike.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks. Good to see you, Dr. Stine.
Dr. Anthony Stine, return to tradition.org. Check his website out if you haven't done so, but I'd be surprised if you haven't done so. But we'll link to that in the show notes as well today. Dr. Stine, God bless you. Thank you for being on with us again every Friday.
Thanks for having me on again.
All right. Praise be to God in all things. You guys have a great weekend. If you could do me a favor on your way out, smash whatever like buttons you see and subscribe buttons. That would mean everything to me. God bless you. God love you. See you Monday.